Today, I was joined by Rich Barham. It's definitely unique in the sense that I have an exec on here, a fancy pants guy on here. He is a industry vet who helped guide World of Warcraft's in-game support team from launch all the way through Wrath of the Lich King. He has also held leadership roles at several other places as well, including Riot Games and ZeniMax, as well as Antimatter Studios. This gives us a really cool insight on the leadership level, the operations level of running studios, and we dive into the past for some of the stories he has from his WoW era. Hope you enjoy. My mom only knew 2 games when I was a kid. She knew Grand Theft Auto, Keep Your Kid Away. So I couldn't play GTAs for the longest time. And she knew World of Warcraft because it would ruin your kid's life if you let your kid play World of Warcraft. So she heard from the news, right? That was back in the day when like video games were not so looked upon in a shining light. Okay. So I wasn't allowed to play those 2 games. Everything else was cool except those 2 games. So I wanted to dive into it. Was that your first break into gaming? How did you get involved with Blizzard? Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so like I say, my interest was writing. So I'd always done lots of writing for TTRPGs, and that was my passion. You know, I was always a writer, and so a couple of my friends worked at Sony Online Entertainment on EverQuest, and I was playing. I mean, I was back then, not so much now, but I was a very hardcore MMO player. Led a guild in EverQuest, played it far too much to be healthy, frankly. But anyway, 2 of my friends got this job.
Like any MMO player. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. But 2 of my friends got jobs as GMs of all things on the Sony Online Entertainment UK team, and I was just amazed that I could do these sort of dull jobs during the day because I worked in sort of corporate, boring management stuff then. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed that they could actually go and get a job doing this. And of course, you know, they were GMs. It wasn't anything terribly exciting. They were working with the game. And I said to them, like, how did you do it? How did you do it? And I remember them saying, and then other people said to me, the amount of writing you do, the amount of sort of creativity that you have, and you're doing these jobs that don't leverage any of it. Why are you doing that? Why don't you try and do it? And anyway, I tried to actually contact Sony Online Entertainment to try and get a job in the same place, and just flat couldn't get any response from them. And it turned out they were just about to close down the UK operation for some reason I don't really understand. So actually, the people I knew that had jobs no longer had jobs with them either. But if you remember then, it was the days of computer magazines. So ads were in computer magazines, and I picked one up and I saw an ad for World of Warcraft. And it was an ad about, you know, we're thinking about scaling up the team for World of Warcraft. And I played Warcraft, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, but I was a bit like, they're all right. But I actually liked Diablo. Diablo was sort of my Blizzard franchise that I liked. So I knew of Blizzard. Of course, Blizzard weren't the Blizzard then that they are the Blizzard now, or even the Blizzard, you know, at World of Warcraft times. They were relatively, you know, successful, but not Leviathan, I don't think, studio. So I thought, I've done all this writing. I can go and write for them. It'll be amazing. So I applied, and it was in France. And I thought, France. I always wanted to live in America, actually. But France, you know, was never really on my radar. And I got a response that basically said, come and talk to us. And I thought, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. And I had to pay my own flights and everything for to go there. So I was a bit like, should I do this? And I went and I interviewed one of the guys there, or one guy there. And I thought, well, that's never going to come off, whatever. And I talked about, you know, my experience of, you know, I've been in management of boring companies, but actually this is what I do in the evenings, and I play a lot of MMOs, and I never really actually thought I'd hear anything back from it. And then I got this offer, and I thought, what am I going to do? And my family didn't want me to go. And actually, I remember my grandfather knew that I was really in dire financial straits at the time, And he actually said, your mother doesn't want you to go and be out of the country, so I will pay for you to get stable if you stay here. And I said, thank you very much. And I took the check, because it was a written check then. And I thought, all right, well, that's over then. Because I had another job offer with Expedia, actually, in Nottingham. I thought, all right, well, it looks like I'm going to work for Expedia in Nottingham. And I took the check home, thought about it overnight, went back in the morning and gave my grandfather the check back and said, I'm really sorry, I have to do this. And then when I got there, it turned out I wasn't going to be writing at all. I was going to be part of the team that was going to build the thing, because what they'd actually seen was they'd seen my writing and thought, oh yeah, whatever. This guy's built teams and knows organization. And so I was, I've talked a lot about being, going there and seeing like 3 or 4 other guys in the room sitting on desks, there were no chairs, and saying, where is everybody? And they were like, no, we are everybody.
What year was this? This would be what, 2002?
2003.
2003?
Yeah, it was 2003. And the team was like nothing. It was just like sort of the people who would be the sort of senior management there. And we built the team. Our projections were wildly wrong, of course. So we had a projection of an entire team for Europe of, I think the total was somewhere around 150 people. By the time I was promoted to the US, we were more than 1,000 people. So
10x, yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I think honestly, 150 people was probably generous for the projections. So, absolutely crazy.
So what happened? So when you got brought on, what was your direct role? What was the expectations? What were some of the conversations you had in terms of, hey, we're going to launch this thing, and here's a little bit in the specifics there. I'm curious.
It was about, for me, so we were working essentially with the operational side of it, primarily, about all the operational side of building a entity for them. And they, I think they wanted to use, as I say, my sort of structural experience of sort of building and doing everything else. I had a very weird title there. It was something like back office manager, which I remember at the time saying, what does this mean? And no one could actually really explain it. And some other people had some way weird titles too. And I looked after everything from things like the processing of accounts. We dealt with account banning, escalation issues, all of those side of things. And in that early stage, it was about building a team that could handle all the languages. And we ended up with, I think it was more than 25 different nationalities.
Oh, wow.
Working for us, which was culturally really challenging, because you have Scandinavians, Germans, French, Spanish, all of which have very different expectations of work environments. Australians, all these people, and you're trying to make a team and a culture that will work for all of them. So, for us, it was about, you had back then, you had a German team and an English team and a French team, and then you had this sort of administrative team that sat off from them, which I was responsible for, that sort of handled the other side of the operations. And then we sort of built it, and obviously Spanish became a thing too. Spanish was built into it. We had a very technical support sort of side of it as well. There was a billing team that handled the many intricacies of billing. We also had a department which dealt with internal affairs. Very much like the COP internal affairs, whereby we were making sure people weren't doing bad things with the power that they had, especially because the game became such a huge phenomenon that we knew there was a serious risk that people would be doing it. And, we dealt with everything from people inside the organization sharing secrets to people killing bosses or giving money or anything like that. So
that just came up. That just happened. Did you see that?
No, I didn't actually. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
That just happened.
A lot of that stuff later on got automated. There was an initiative in the US team specifically when I was in the US, whereby the guys that were dealing with it there automated a lot of the detection and that sort of side of it. But early days, things like account bans and dealing with bad behavior and things internally.
So what were some of the things? So to back it up just a touch there. So you're there in 2003. WoW launched in late 2004. What was some of the conversations in terms of, managing expectations? Hey, this is what we're going to be doing. This is how we're going to handle it. Systems that you guys had set up in place. I'm assuming you had a beta for this to practice on, right?
We were playing sort of the friends and family-esque sort of version of it all the way through. So from when I started there and when there were only a couple of us there, we had access to the game to sort of try to understand what the game was like and where we needed to go with the game. Bear in mind that everything we were going off of there was EverQuest, really. EverQuest was like the marker. There were a lot of internal conversations which was something along the lines of, hey, so, if we're kind of fortunate, we might get to be as big as EverQuest. of course, EverQuest 2 was in development then, right? Yeah. EverQuest 2 was, I think it's fair to say, I was a former EverQuest player, right? So I was obviously having sort of one eye on that and like, wonder how that's going to work out. And obviously EverQuest 2 did not have a great launch. And, I don't think realistically ever to this day ever really lived up to EverQuest either, even though both of them are still sort of limping along today. But yeah, I think the big marker in terms of sort of how we were going to do things and everything else was very focused on, how did Verint and then Sony Online Entertainment deal with EverQuest, and they had that sort of level of players. There was a lot of worry about things like how the infrastructure and the servers would cope with it. And obviously,
how did they cope? I don't know, because obviously I wasn't playing. Yeah, okay, I would imagine with the freaking massive surge.
Pretty badly, because no one expected that game to be a fraction of what that game was. It was completely. I consider myself very fortunate because at the time I had no gaming experience, like other than stuff that wasn't video games. Right. I ended up in a leadership position when realistically that just came from leadership totally in a different area. And I think I really value my time there, not only because the spirit in that team, I've worked in really great teams before, led lots of really great teams, but there was something so special about the Blizzard Europe team because most of the people weren't French, so they were away from home, mostly for the first time. We ate together. We worked together. The only thing we didn't do was, we had our own houses or flats. Like, people weren't sleeping in barracks or something. But other than that, from the morning I went to work with someone from work, I'd pick them up in my car. We'd go to work. We'd talk about work. And it never got to the point where it felt too much or unhealthy. Sure. Everyone loved what we were doing. The whole team, I still remember as the team sort of grew to 12 and 20 and, a little bit beyond that, everyone would be at the same restaurant. It wasn't a case of I'm going home, goodbye. That was the case with some of the French team who already had their organized social circles.
Sure.
But for that first, I want to say year probably, or just under a year, things got a bit more siloed and segmented after that because, the pressures of release and the different teams and disagreements. But in that first year, there was something truly special about that. We'd be together so much, and we didn't always agree, but there was incredible fellowship. Incredible fellowship there. And I think, I've alluded to it in the past. I still remember things like, the guys in charge of the German one let me use their washing machine because my apartment didn't have a washing machine. It's a silly memory. But it's like an enduring memory. And it was all lost. All that fellowship was lost in the way that it existed at the start later on. But it was never forgotten. I don't think that was ever forgotten, and very hard to reproduce. And even though I've been part of building up studios since numerous times, really, I've never seen anything quite like that. It was really magical. And
That's incredible. It sounds magical the way you put it.
That studio, what it truly was. And I think, that's thanks to people like the ultimate boss there, Frederick Menu, who was the number one guy in Europe. He was, he was quite a young guy at the time, incredibly smart, but he managed to balance being in charge of that organization with a great humanity. He cared about people, had a great sense of humor. He was a very personable person. And I think, they say that leadership helps their organization to take on some of those values. And I think a lot of us, as we grew, and we made a million mistakes. Like I remember a lot of mistakes that I made there. And, and I think all of us probably are happy that we maybe took a little of what Frederick had on with us on our respective journeys. And he was, he was one of, many exceptional leaders that I've worked with, and a better person, even so. Really a better person even than that.
So when WoW launches, and obviously you see that surge you were talking about, and obviously everyone's happy because you have a success and it's massive. But from your side, you're kind of dealing with the back end of that, right? Like, okay, oh shit. Like what's the room like when you're like, how do we put out this massive fire we're blessed to have, but it's a challenge now we have to face?
So incredulous, I guess, is the is the first thing that I would say. I think we weren't really able to worry about it too much. I remember working 36 hours straight.
How to deal with it.
On launch, I remember working 36 hours straight, and I wasn't the only one. We all did. All the leadership did, and in the end, I remember being basically told to go home because I couldn't see straight reading an Excel spreadsheet that I was putting codes or something into. And everyone worked really hard, but we'd worked really hard for this. Obviously, when something goes 100x or God knows how many x on what you're expecting, you are happy, of course, and we were all very happy because this was incredible. I remember, we kept calling the US, who said, let us know when you break through this many people. And, we called them and they're like, why are you calling us already? And we're like, yeah, we broke through it. I think in the US, there are a few people who also didn't expect it, who were staying up that night saying, oh no, now we better watch this. But I think for us, the first thing was there was that incredible feeling of like, wow, we're such a success. This is so amazing to be a small part of a big success like this. Yeah. And then, as you say, then it was the kind of it's a bit like surfing the wave where you drop off and then it crushes you to the sand underneath as it rolls over you. We were like, how many people are we actually going to have to hire to deal with this? Yeah. And then the sort of calculations of, and we opened our thing. I recall we were getting more than 1,000 applications a day. Oh, wow. And how do you even manage something like that? I mean, you didn't have AI back then, so you couldn't just throw it into something. Like, how do you even handle that? Essentially, I mean, I took quite a big part in the process of how we would do it, just purely because I'd done a lot of that stuff outside of games before. And I think the bottom line is we had to be brutal in the first place. Yeah. So we were looking for, I couldn't tell you now what they were, but we were looking for, I think, a key list of points that we put together. Okay. And if you didn't hit those, you were in the discard. Yeah. So we could scan for these things, and if we didn't see all of them, you're in a discard. So we were discarding a lot of people. We were trying to make sure everyone got a reply. I hope that happened. And we were trying to filter aggressively, really aggressively filter, and that was manual. So when you're looking at that many applications, you have multiple people who are doing it. You can process a lot of applications if you've got a good filter, and I'm not talking filter where you're looking for keywords. That was all too fancy. We were looking at resumes, and there were key things we were looking at. And basically, if you didn't have them, we're filtering. So we could filter those 1,000 down to a lot less. Yeah. We tried to have, as I say, a good process for interviewing which was quick and could get it done. We worked with a relocation agency who just took all of that. I mean, those guys must have bought themselves a private island off of the fees that we paid them. But they took care of the sort of things that we just didn't have the infrastructure to do that ourselves. So relocation agency dealt with all that stuff.
Right.
We brought people in. We had to know that they were willing to do it. Of course, that was before the UK ridiculously left Europe. So, we had all of Europe, and, visas weren't really an issue for, I think 100% probably of people that we dealt with. So we didn't have that worry.
Right.
And we were having waves of people brought in. I was given responsibility for adding the training department to my, we were called QC, quality control, I think.
Right.
There was training they dealt with and quality of work, because there were so many things going back to customers, so many interactions with customers on such a big level that we had to try to make sure that quality was kept up, even though it was huge volume. So that department that I grew built on the quality side of it, but also on training. So we dealt with a lot of training. I gave some management training myself at the time for people who'd been promoted up. So, where we had that core team, a lot of that core team stepped up then to the next level of being sort of senior people and then sort of lead people above that as they grew. And a lot of those people, as I say, were people we promoted in-house to try to, firstly, obviously reward that. And they had a head start when we didn't have time for people to take a long time in spinning up. Mm. And so we grew the organisation like that. But there were huge mistakes made. Certainly we spent more money on things because we had to do that, because we didn't have the time to do the due diligence and save the money. I think that happened a lot across Blizzard, to be honest, during that time. We were struggling with tools. Tools were built in-house, and at the time they weren't great either. So that was something whereby that was a pain point for sure. And I think we had to try to be reactive. You always talk about being proactive and planning for. You can't plan for that because it just hit you, in the face with zero warning, and now you're trying to work out what to do about it. And so for us, we had to be purely reactive on, I guess, 80+% of what we were doing. There was very little opportunity or bandwidth for, proactive planning. We got better at that as time went on, but I don't blame any of us really, because there just wasn't the opportunity. There wasn't the bandwidth. We didn't have the people. We were doing the best we could. But I think, when I look at a lot of the things that I'm proud to say I do better now, they have often, not always, but often roots in those years with Blizzard, because we were just making those mistakes and, running with it as we got to it, course correcting as we needed to. In some cases, I think it's fair to say mistakes were made that took a couple of years in our careers to percolate. And then we look back on it, like years later and said, wow, I wouldn't do that today.
Right.
It just took quite a long time in some of those cases, I think, to truly realize that. And I like to think that I can stand up as a sort of executive leader with most of my peers now. Mm-hmm. But then, I'd like to say I was a good manager then. I was a good leader then. But, I was still learning in a lot of things. Sure. We all were. We were all still learning, and we were learning whilst having a vast amount of responsibility. So, without that, we were tempered by fire. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the better for it. Yeah, definitely.
So I think I would say that, that experience there, especially being your first experience in the gaming industry, I mean, it probably set you up for your career and gave you all those skills necessary, like you mentioned. So then you went out to the US. It looks like in 2006. Is that right?
I was in the US with Blizzard from I think it was 2006. I was offered the opportunity to go there. I'd always wanted to live in America. I'd obviously visited California a few times, on visits with Blizzard as part of the org from Europe. Yeah. Really like the people there. There's a guy called Thor Bayer4, who was like the head of the sort of division then. I got on very well with him. I still speak to him even today. And he ran all of the sort of customer service and the sort of operational sort of side of things. on the player side, and I had the opportunity to go out there, and I couldn't get out there quick enough. Always want to live in the US. The biggest mistake of my life, without doubt, is leaving the US. When I left the US, I wish I was still there now, but my green card's expired, so what can you do?
Yeah.
And I loved my time. I loved my time in the US.
Well, you're living in one of the most beautiful places in the entire world right there, right? I mean, when a lot of people think US, yeah, exactly. Like when people think of the US, they think of, because it's, how can you blame them? That's what they see on TV. California and New York and Miami, like those are kind of the big ones. So you're living in one of the most truly beautiful spots. Of a friend in that area, and incredibly jealous of what he gets to deal with compared to what I get to deal with. So in that respect, I totally see it. So you're overlooking in this part. This is when they're starting to drop some of the expansions. Is that right? What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you went to the US? Your new role, what did that look like? Some of the things that maybe surprised you, some things that experiences that maybe weren't as big of a deal as you might have thought they were going to be heading into it. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So my role changed a little bit because I worked directly for another person who had a very different way of working. Okay. They were a real authoritarian, former Marine, former.
This is how it gets done. Yeah. Okay.
Not. I think we were oil and water. We didn't mix at all. So I loved my time in the US. Hated working for that person. Okay. And I think they wanted things done by in a certain way that I didn't agree with. And I think in the US, I found that coming from a leader who was very, not laid back, but quite personable, to one who was not at all, was really difficult for me. Yeah. I respect now, years on, some of the things that he did and the way he did it. I do not respect the way he did it, should we say. Yeah. And so I found that really difficult. I expected culture to be very similar between the UK and the US offices. And I think what I found in the US office internally is that there are a lot of very ambitious people. And a lot of those ambitious people were willing to do whatever was necessary, including sort of climbing over the corpses of their peers to get up. And I didn't really see that quite as much in it. I saw it a little bit, and I think it's a workplace thing, but I saw it a lot more in the US office when I was there. Obviously, I wasn't dealing with multiple languages then. We were dealing specifically with sort of the English language version of the game. It was still, a lot more on the operational side then. So I think, the biggest struggles I had was, and they had things like clock in and clock out cards, which, coming from not just the UK, but also more recently working in France, it seemed really a horrendous thing for a games company to have. And so culturally, the workplace was a lot more formal than I actually expected in those cases. And I think the operational side of it was very different from the development side of it. And so,
surprised to hear that. I'm really surprised to hear that back then, right? Maybe it got that way after it exploded. I don't know.
No, I think developers as in, if you were an artist or a coder or a designer especially, or a writer, were rock stars, like very much treated like rock stars. You had tiki bars in people's offices and all sorts of things.
Yeah, I've heard.
If you're more on the operational side of it, you were definitely a different class of human.
I see. Okay.
And that was hard for me. That was hard for me to understand because I hadn't really been exposed to that in Europe because we were very arm's length and just getting things done. So I think going in there, a lot of wonderful people there, but I acutely felt I'm working on the operational side, studio operational side of the business here, and I really feel like I'm a sort of second-class citizen compared to
somebody
working on the business. And it wasn't obviously just me; it was everybody, and it was a real complaint. And you also saw that, and you saw that in lots of organisations, like in QA. QA, I think, were always the ones who got, worse. That sort of felt worse there too. So it's difficult, and I don't think that's gone away even today. If you ask people in QA, customer service, localization, I think you would probably get quite a lot of that. It's one of the reasons why I've always seen embedded QA, for example, as a really positive thing, because QA do an incredibly important job, and having those as part of the, actually part of the development team, rather than you go and sit over there in your box. I saw that even as recently as last year. I worked with a company where I, recommended strongly to the founder that we get embedded QA, and actually that was one thing that was taken on and was done, was that embedded QA became a thing instead of you sit over there and shut up. And I think that gives the people in QA two things. One, it gives them a better sense of belonging, but it also gives them a better chance of, if they want to move on from QA, a closer lockstep understanding of what the rest of development does, as opposed to trying to move into the rest of development when, you're not seen as part of development by some people, including maybe the person that you're trying to get hired by.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, right? Because the only insight I had to Blizzard at that time was a handful of months ago on Lex Friedman's podcast. There was Jeff Kaplan who was talking about some of those days, right? Which obviously Jeff Kaplan, right? He's a stud, but he's looking at it from that perspective. And then also Pirate Software. He worked at Blizzard. I don't know if you're familiar with all the stuff there in terms of his stuff, man. But my only two insights on Blizzard back then are from those side. He was QA, I think. But it makes sense though, because you're coming in a little bit later, 06, and you're coming in from that kind of management side, the operational side. So you're seeing it from a different perspective than everyone else. I am curious, and I have to ask, and if you don't want to dive into it, don't. But Jason Schreier, he put out a video yesterday, or maybe it wasn't yesterday, within the last week or so, talking about some of the stuff over there at Blizzard. Was it like kind of crazy and rambunctious as people say, or is it getting blown out of proportion, or?
So it's a really interesting question. So there was some stuff that coming from, because I came from a corporate background before I was in games, right?
Sure.
So what I would say is there was some stuff there that was just weird.
Okay.
And bear in mind, I wasn't in a lot of these development things. Now, if something really crazy happened, it would have been on the development side. I probably wouldn't have seen it. But in terms of how some people behaved, there were weird things. So, for example, I remember when people were working on night, because there were night shifts, right? Because they worked around the clock.
Yeah, you have to with that.
Some people would bring pillows with them and wear pajamas. And maybe I'm just a bit old school, but I was like, that is a little strange. And I remember sending someone home for wearing a swimsuit to work. Because they, by their own reasoning, they were going to go to the beach afterwards. And actually, the reason I sent them home was because some of their colleagues were like, I cannot focus because the person next to me are wearing no clothes.
So
there was some strange, like gamey sort of stuff like that happened, where it's like, it's all cool. We can, do crazy stuff because we're in games.
Yeah.
I didn't see. I've heard the rumors too of really crazy stuff.
Some of the stuff that went on,
I didn't see it. But what I would say is, I don't think I'd be 100% surprised if there was some level of truth in it. But I would also say that I think it's probably to some extent blown out of proportion. But that's only based on the fact that when there is when there's a core of truth, sometimes people do tend to blow it up. But I have no experience on which base of it. I could be full of crap there. That's just my interpretation of it. I don't think Blizzard was a in those days, I can't speak to Activision and beyond, but in those days, I never felt like there was bad intention at Blizzard, and I never felt as though there was an active reason for people to behave in a way that made others feel bad and uncomfortable. But that was as an organisation. There were definitely individuals that weren't pleasant. That's for sure. I'm not going to name names, but there were certainly people there that I felt behaved badly, for sure. And I don't actually mean, in terms of sexual harassment or something like that, which I know has been mentioned. I mean in terms of to their fellow human beings, people in leadership who would very obviously look down on certain, groups because they're like, oh, you're just in this, this department.
Right.
And I heard that firsthand from someone in the C-suite walking around an office, and I was very unhappy about that. But I will say that was absolutely not Mike Morhaime, who I think is a very, very good leader and one of the people that I really appreciated having had the chance to work for.
Right on.
But I did see somebody talking directly down within earshot of those people to somebody else while they were doing the tour of that department, which I thought was disappointing.
I got
so there were some bad people. There were some people who behaved poorly. I don't think that was institutionalized, in my opinion. But again, I could have missed it because it could have been in, certain development-only meetings.
Oh, sure. Okay, right on. Well, yeah, appreciate the insight on that. I was just curious because it had been fresh in the news cycle. So you, in 2008, looks like you went over to ZeniMax on ESO and talk to me. What made you jump over to there, and what did that look like for you?
I felt that I was, ready and effectively doing the director role at the time, and I had a meeting with a guy who I won't name, but was very senior. This was a VP, and he basically said, "Listen, we're not going to consider you for that director role." And I said, "Well, I've been here all this time. I've done all these things. Yeah, we're very happy with you, but we are now going to be broadening our leadership portfolio for these set of director roles." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "We're going to be going out into the industry outside of games to sort of portfolio companies." And he gave examples as sort of Virgin America, Amazon, Google, the big sort of names, and getting leaders from there, because obviously the company had suddenly become this quite huge.
Oh, that's not what you want to hear. That's not. Yeah.
And actually it was a closed door meeting, and I said, "Well, what do you expect me to do then?" And he said, "We don't want to lose you. You've been with us across 2 regions, but my advice to you behind closed doors is that maybe you should leave, get the role that you deserve, and then we would hope you would one day come back to Blizzard," is what he said. And that wasn't what I wanted. I did love Blizzard, but I was very frustrated about the, lack of upward mobility, especially given what I just heard. So I looked around, and actually I interviewed a lot of places, and I was offered every job I interviewed for. Somebody who'd been where I was with Blizzard on World of Warcraft at that time,
hot
it
commodity.
Was a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Everyone recognized it. Most of those companies that I spoke to, I wanted to go there. I wanted to look at the game. I wanted to look at what I'd be doing. I wanted to, spread out and ultimately head more towards working with development as well as operations more. But I wanted it to be somewhere that was successful, because Blizzard were the biggest thing, right? I didn't want to go from the biggest thing to something that was less.
Right.
And the only one that I felt had a realistic opportunity to actually have longevity was Bethesda, right? Bethesda, the Elder Scrolls, right? I mean, that there's a realistic reason as to why that would be compelling, even from Blizzard. And I spoke to the people there. Didn't really want to live on the East Coast, if I'm honest, because I love the West Coast. But I was like, okay, that's fine. Very small team. It was a role where I'd be part of this, centrally part of the leadership, on the business council that sort of made decisions for the studio. I'd have the chance to do things that I hadn't done before, which is like, present to the ZeniMax board, which had, the head of CBS, the head of Fox, the head of Bank of America, Trump.
Oh man, that's crazy.
Trump elder, believe it or not, Robert Trump, insane people, and I really wanted the chance to show what I could do in front of that sort of audience. So I made the move. Didn't ever really like the East Coast, but I loved the team. There were so many.
I can't imagine you wouldn't fall in love with Baltimore. I can't imagine.
Hunt Valley was actually all right, and I actually ended up buying a house and living in Philadelphia across the county line. But basically, the people at ZeniMax, some of the loveliest people
That's
that
good to hear.
I worked with. Lots of really good memories there. Really nice time for my wife and I there, even though we missed California. I never quite synced with the game, if I'm honest. There were a lot of changes to the game. It didn't feel like we were making really good direction. I remember being on the business council and being one of two people who strongly made a case not to have a subscription base for it based on the way the market was going, but we were kind of already on a collision course with that and couldn't change it. And I felt after a while I was starting to talk to my wife and say, you know what, should we consider going out to California? I really miss California. I love the people here, but I just don't quite sync with the product somehow.
Right.
And I'd done quite a lot of cool things there. I'd got to negotiate with governments. I'd got to build an office in Europe, got to build another office in the UK for them, build up those teams, be responsible for sort of that European team as well. Really nice responsibilities. But, I was thinking about it, but I didn't apply for anywhere, actually. What happened was I got a random phone call from someone who said, is this Rich Barham? Yes. Hey, we've heard of you and we want to hire you. What do you say? That's the exact conversation. And I said, who is this? And it turned out to be Riot Games. And they were like, we're going to fly you over. We're going to do this, that, and the other. It was a crazy day. I basically walked in to 100 people in a theatre and having to present to them at the start of the day. I had interviews for like about 10 hours, ending with, being asked problem questions by one of the founders, and then, a fairly aggressive meeting with the president. And for 10 hours, and then being taken out for Mexican food in the evening after all that day, and basically being told, we want to hire you. And I'm like, well, okay, but I've got a house and it's upside down because the market just dipped. And they did crazy things with their move. They paid off my house, and they were like, just sign this, and just sign this. We'll pay off your house. You can walk away from your house, which is, upside down because
that's
of the market.
awesome though, because that's got to make you feel valued and
absolutely. Move us across there. Really good reload package. Offered a lot more money than I was on, and I was on good money anyway. And I was like, look, I got a really high energy feeling from Riot. Things at ZeniMax. I loved the people, but wasn't sure about the product. Let's go back to California. And my wife was like, okay, this seems to be what you want.
Yeah.
Went back there, hated working at Riot instantly.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a shame. Yeah.
It was, all the stuff. I'm not going to say anything here other than this. All the stuff that you heard about early days of Riot are true.
Okay.
From my side, I felt like from the first day, I didn't fit there. It was all like college bro fist bumps and like woo and like really weird cult energy. I would describe it as like a cult. It felt like a cult.
Yeah.
In every meeting, they said, one of the things was challenge conventions, which essentially meant argue with anyone, no matter who you are, is what it meant. So you'd go to a meeting with people from, global director to producer to everything in between, and people would just be yelling at each other or talking over the top of each other, and it just chaos. I walked into teams that were working 12-hour days and then playing 4 hours of League of Legends afterwards because that was the culture. And I was like, go home. You need to go home. You're going to burn out. And, I made enemies because I was telling people to go home and burn out. There were people in, let's say, protected categories that I was trying to make sure didn't struggle. And you can't be one person against a company when bad practice is going on. I knew people who went to Riot, and I knew people that worked at Riot who will say it's the best experience of their life. So I think it's unfair of me to say it was a bad place. It was a bad place for me.
Okay.
I had a bad experience there, did not enjoy it at all. And then the opportunity came up to move back to the UK. A family member was ill, and we took it with both hands because my wife just said, "You're so unhappy." I had an hour and a half commute to and from work. I lived in Rancho Palos Verdes, and I drove to Santa Monica every day, an hour and a half sitting on the 405 each way.
I
love
can't
driving,
imagine. Yeah.
Driving. So, I didn't, I talked about that unhealthy level of competition where everyone was trying to get to the next stage by murdering all the people around them. That was like 10x'd at Riot, or 100x'd over anything I'd seen before. And it felt like everyone was an A-type personality. It was like working in an assassin's guild, where you were like, who's going to stab somebody else in this meeting?
Yeah, sure.
And that's just my interpretation. Like I say, there are other people who I respect who've worked there since and during that time who loved it, but it just wasn't the place for me. I like very collaborative workplaces where people value kindness, where people want to achieve something together. I did not feel that there. Maybe I was in the wrong place, with the wrong people, in the wrong departments, whatever. I didn't feel that there, and I felt like a fish out of water. And that's when I went back to the UK, found that there was basically no work in the UK at that time for my sort of level of seniority. Was in contact with IO Interactive, went to IO Interactive to sort of work with Hannah Seifert, who was the head of studio there. Hitman was being worked on, to sort of do reorganization of the studio, work with the publisher there, Square Enix, because Square Enix and IO, I think, they had the publisher were in the UK. Obviously, IO were Danish, and I think their ways of seeing things were very different. So it was useful, I think, for me to be able to sort of act as an intermediary there and improve those relationships. But I didn't enjoy Denmark. I'm a car guy. I love cars. Denmark doesn't like cars very much at all.
Yeah.
And also, I found things incredibly expensive. 2 sandwiches and 1 coffee, $50, right?
I believe it.
Very expensive. And also, I found it difficult to deal with the found it very difficult to deal with the Danish culture because I think Danish people are very warm to their circle of friends. It's very hard to be accepted into it. And my wife and I, coming from outside of that, really found it difficult. So when the time came, I felt like I'd achieved what I'd set out to agree to achieve. I decided to move back to the UK to work with Falmouth University and also to sit on the board at Antimatter, where I then became the CEO. But that, in a way, that was both my best and worst move because, obviously I should have gone back to the US then before my 2 years on my green card ran out. But I couldn't find the right role in the US to come back to the US then. So I went past the 2 years, didn't realise I could have submitted a form to sort of say something about that far too late then. And I stayed at Antimatter. I loved my time at Antimatter, building what we built. We did a good job. The team were, generally nice. Some really good people there. But I think I stayed there too long. I stayed there out of loyalty to the people, trying to keep a company which didn't have much money going, taking it ultimately through publisher deal and then acquisition. Whereas I think I should have moved on. I think for my career then, I should have probably moved on. I think certainly now when people look at it, they look at it as CEO, but they're like, CEO, but of a pretty small company. So I wonder now in retrospect, if I'm analytical, if, after so many years, I should have moved on and moved back to a big company. You always, I think, in those sort of times, I think you always wonder, was it the right thing, wasn't it? And I think, like I say, in retrospect for me, I often think maybe I should have stopped then and gone back to a bigger company for my career's reasons. But I'm glad and I'm proud of the fact that when the ownership company decided to close us down for reasons that I to this day find repugnant, that I was able to go to bat in the market and find somewhere through my connections that would give everybody pretty much a job. And I moved the whole team on. There wasn't a long-term opportunity for me there, so I did a 3-month handover, and then obviously moved the team on. The regret I have, of course, is that Behaviour Interactive, who took on most of the team, then went through many layers of layoffs, and then a lot of the team that managed to preserve their jobs then lost their jobs anyway. But I really wanted to make sure that when I heard we were going to be closed down, I tried to find somewhere so that no one on the team would ever miss a paycheck, and we managed to get everyone brought in without missing a paycheck. Who was going to come out. And there are only a few sort of non-performers and people that, in good conscience, I couldn't recommend to move across. But I think it was 80-90% of the team that moved across to Behaviour Interactive.
Oh, good.
Well, sadly, it didn't really work out. But, I did what I could.
Hey guys, just started Pembridge Plus over on Patreon. I do a weekly show with my good buddy Adrian. We talk about video game news, TV shows, all kinds of different stuff over there, to be honest. And you get a little bit of a behind the scenes on the podcast, the guests I bring in, and some other cool goodies too. So if you want to support the channel, that's a great place to do so. So I've seen another interview of yours a while back, and you had a bunch of Star Wars stuff in the background. And
yes, I've moved house since then, so if I could turn you my, I don't know if turning you my camera is gonna. You will see. Let's just see.
Oh yeah, there we go.
More stuff I do. My new, bigger, new improved office is full of nerdery, but just in different places, I suppose now.
No, I love that. I don't know why, but it's like. Every time I try to get a couple deviations away from Star Wars, I always get brought back in. So I have people pointing out to me, it's like, everyone you have on worked in Star Wars projects. I'm like, I guess they did. So maybe I should try to veer away.
It's my shortest. It's funny because I haven't, and yet, like, see, my background. My interest background, if you like, before I was in video games was in writing. I worked a little bit in films, and before that I worked in very boring stuff. But what I always did myself, predominantly for TTRPGs, was writing. And I wrote for live role-playing companies. I wrote for Games Day, which is a very old school British sort of institution of tabletop gaming. But my interest was always writing. And actually, I always said there's a few franchises that I always wanted to write for, and they were and obviously Star Wars, like many Star Wars fans, like Star Wars is the one thing I would want to write for. One of the other ones for me, which is pretty topical given the people I used to work for at IO Interactive, I always wanted to write a Bond, but I actually wrote what was essentially a Bond story for IGI Origins, which got cancelled. I wrote the story for that. Yeah. And I wish that had come out. I wish that the studio hadn't got closed. That was a real work of love, that game, and we never really had the resources, to be honest, to deliver it. That was a part of a bigger problem. But if we had, I think that game would have done really, really well.
Yeah, I guess we could work backwards a little bit. I saw that. And I saw it on Steam, and there's still people asking, like, when I searched it, I'm like, like, I are they still going or not? Like, I couldn't tell if it was still being developed.
I still have people making, I mean, I don't post very much on, for example, other than LinkedIn, which I use quite often to communicate, just because it's my sort of professional base. I don't really use too much of social media outside of that. I have things like a Facebook page, and bizarrely, and I don't know how, occasionally I'll post a picture for family of like my son and I going crabbing, and some dude from the other side of the world will be like, "Please, sir, why IGI Origins cancelled?" And I'm like, well, you shouldn't really ask me that question. Firstly, you should probably go back till it was cancelled and not be asking that now. Secondly, where did you come from? How did you get onto this page?
Yeah, exactly.
And thirdly, like, believe me, if I could have had the team that I needed to actually deliver that game, which we never really had. We had some great people working on it, but there just wasn't enough resource given by the publisher. Then basically we would have been fine, and I think the game would have done really well. I think it had, because IGI 1 and IGI 2, which obviously we were nothing to do with, had an install base in Southeast Asia specifically. So whenever a PC was like sold, it had IGI installed on it, or IGI 2. And so, like, especially in Southeast Asia, everyone knows it. And even today, even though those games are pretty old now, there are still people like streaming and showing playthroughs, because they've got that, ultimate playthrough sort of feeling, the same one that you have from, say, Hitman, right, where you can go back and do the same mission a million times.
Yeah.
And so, there was a big audience for it. The community engagement. We were going past 1 million views on YouTube as a pretty small developer that Antimatter were. We were going past 1 million views on some of our content for it. Quite significant in terms of interest. And yeah, it was. I could talk for hours about the challenges of that sort of era for Antimatter after we were acquired. And it was a really challenging time, and I think not a great time universally. Really great opportunity. Very happy to sort of be given the IP to develop the game of. But after we started working on it, it became apparent that the publisher just didn't have the resources to make the game what the game needed to be. And we could have downscoped it, could have reduced the quality radically. But that wasn't, the game as it was set out. That wasn't the game as it was due to be, and it certainly, I don't think it would have sold very well. I don't think it would have done very well if we'd radically reduced the quality and scope of it. The game as it was, even for a fraction of the budget, say that First Light had, and I've played First Light. I played First Light, enthusiastically when it came out, because they announced at a very similar time to IGI Origins, and in many ways, even though obviously I hadn't worked there for some time, I have a lot of friends that or people I think of as friends there, not really close in touch, but I know that we were very much aware of First Light, and I know from viewing figures, shall we say, that they were also watching what we were doing, and a lot of things now that were behind the screen, shall we say, that have come out are really interesting, because there are a lot of parallels. One of the things that I laid out for the team was, this needs to be a really filmic experience, right? It's, we obviously didn't have the James Bond license, but the IGI was, the idea of there being essentially a special forces operative who goes in and does these sort of, one-person missions with someone in their ear, not dislike other games of that type. And the sort of filmic quality that we really had as one of our pillars. We were first person, so there was a bit of a difference there. But really trying to create this sort of globe-trotting environment, embracing the sort of tropes of those sort of IPs, things like Bond and Mission Impossible. And Mission Impossible doesn't dwell in one location, right? If you look at all of the films, you'll see they are globetrotting. Bond is very well known for it being, a tour of exotic and beautiful locations. And those were all things we'd folded into the game. There's some very funny things that came out whereby some of the tropes that we had put into our game, which obviously never launched, are in First Light as well.
Oh yeah, really?
Yeah. I mean, I can't say too much, because even though the game is kind of dead and everything, but just one very small thing, like the wintry place with the cable car, where you're on the cable car, we had that too. It's a real Bond trope right, where he goes through the cable car. And so when that came up in First Light, I had a really good long laugh about that, because it was like, we obviously, did the same research, we looked at the same things. I don't want to say too much about anything else about the game, because obviously old NDAs, but there were a lot of things whereby I looked at our research, and we were like, what are these sort of big secret agent superhero crossover-y sort of feel moments? How can we reproduce those? Because people are looking for those things.
Right.
And yeah, like I say, that is one example. There were certainly others where we looked at it and we're like, yep, same research. They sat around in the same sort of meetings and were like, people really want to see this that they've had from these sort of films. People really want to feel this. And I think First Light's a great game, but I think considering the radically different budget and resources we had, even if we'd had what we asked for, which we didn't have delivered to us, I think we could have shown quite well against, admittedly we in this case were the sort of indie film and they were the sort of blockbuster AAA. But I think the game could potentially have stood up very well, and shown that we had a lot of talent in that team. There was a lot of passion for the product, and if things hadn't gone the way that they went with the the publisher and owning company, then it could have been a really interesting time.
Yeah. So IGI, for a lot of people who don't know, and the only reason I do know is because I did a little bit of research on this. So first person tactical shooter in late 90s, is that right?
Yeah, so it was around that period for those. Okay. I'm not breaking any NDAs by saying that Origins is obviously a return, because it was already publicized in the press that the Origins was before that. So what we had done is we'd gone back. So it was the origin story
to the 80s, right? I think that's
exactly. Yeah. It was the origin story of the IGI organization being formed, and people wanted to sort of feel that they could have a game that would not interfere with their memories of IGI 1 and 2, and the obvious way to do that was to go back before. Which was great for us because it gave us the chance to explore new, different characters. We didn't have to worry too much about, there being some weird continuity errors, but there were definitely, quite a lot of nods to characters that had been present in the other ones. But obviously, we had to be very careful about the timelines and how old people would be and where they would be.
Oh,
we
sure.
We had to do a lot of plotting that out, where there were a few sort of early storylines where we're like, yeah, that person couldn't have done that because they were actually this old and they weren't here. Much like a lot of other sort of storyline planning. But that was a hugely fun part of it, because we got to meld what we were able to glean from all of the community about what they loved about IGI, whether that be certain characters, whether that be certain things. I remember in the early planning days a lot of talk about what makes IGI. Why is it not another game? And there were some funny things, I think, about things like about how you climbed ladders. I vaguely recall being one of them, and the way that you sort of engage with ladders and that goes. And we tried to reproduce some of those while obviously updating the gameplay, because the gameplay was pretty old. And we needed to bring that forward into something that felt competitive and compelling for people to play today. And obviously it was in Unreal. We started in Unreal 4 and then ported over to Unreal 5 when Unreal 5 came out. And the big challenge I think for that game would obviously have been, can everyone play it when you have a lot of people in regions such as Southeast Asia, where we're getting a lot of feedback from the fans saying, I hope this is going to run on a Pentium. And we're like, dude, this is not going to run on a Pentium no matter what we do. And, I don't know how much that might have impacted certain cross sections of it, but we did want to make sure that we brought it forward so it was the game that sort of could compete, in the time it was planned to release. with other games that are out there. So it was a really fun experience. We got to do all that work on, what are the big IPs that we want to sort of embrace, those tropes of, Bond obviously being a big one of those, as well as those nods to things that the community loved. And melding that together was a really fun experience. For me as the person trying to create a vision out of that, it was a really, really great product to be involved in.
Yeah, when I was watching the gameplay of it, it looked a lot like a tactical shooter. So I've been playing a lot of tactical shooters over the last couple years here. A lot of Gray Zone Warfare. If you ever heard of Gray Zone Warfare, I've been playing a lot of that. Was it gonna be more of a because First Light's kind of a third person action, cinematic experience? Was this going to be kind of more tactical and slower paced?
I don't feel that it was as tactical as maybe it was set out to be initially.
Okay.
We certainly wanted to have elements that would give people that opportunity to use the environment, to play in the way that they wanted to play. It was really important for us that somebody could take one of the levels and play that a million times and have a fairly different experience based on the way that they approach that. And there, for us, there are of course some level of stealth elements to First Light. For us, that was certainly more so. And we wanted it to be, to give you an idea of the sort of way in which it was tactically inclined. We wanted it to be that you could, in theory, go in guns blazing, but if you did, it was almost impossible to succeed unless you were incredibly skilled, right? Whereas, with First Light, I made a couple of mistakes in some levels and I still won, right?
You'd be fine, yeah.
I don't think I have the skill, looking back at it, certainly if we'd hit all the markers we wanted to hit. I don't think I, for example, had the skill to complete an IGI level where I went in and shot the first person in the face with a unsilenced rifle.
Right.
I don't think that's if we had got it right by the time it was complete. So yeah, a lot more tactical in that. Stealth was a lot more important. You could kill everyone, of course. That was, I don't want to say encouraged, but that was given as an option.
Right.
But just going in all guns blazing, that would mean that you'd be fighting incredible odds who were meant to work together, who were prepared in in many cases in defensive locations, right? Because the very nature of IGI was you were usually going into
infiltration.
To hostile territory to achieve something by infiltration usually. And so, we wanted to blend that with a very deep story. That was really important to me from the start. Probably because, I have a very narrative background and I really wanted this not to feel like a tactical shooter where someone had sort of stapled a very flimsy story onto the end. Sure. And so the story, in the story, I mean, when I wrote the story, I wrote it such that we tried to do everything we could so that people would get a reward from actually paying attention to it.
Okay.
So the more that you actually engaged with the story, the more you found out. And so you could play through the whole story and be like, yeah, I don't really care. It's all good. I'm just going to shoot everybody. And you get to the end and you'd be like, okay, fine. I vaguely realized some stuff happened and I have this overview. But if you checked stuff, if you read files, if you cross-read this file with that file, we built a lot into the story, which was like, that's why that person did that thing. That's why that was there. This is why those people did that thing. And if you went sort of halfway through it and you didn't read much, but you paid a bit closer attention, there would absolutely be some points whereby, and this was intentional, you'd see stuff in the community where people would be like, this is stupid, this story was stupid because that person did this and it doesn't make sense. And the intention was built in there so that players would do that, and other players would say, that's because you didn't read this. That's because you didn't listen to that conversation. That's because you didn't know that. And, there's obviously a big twist in the story, which I won't talk about, but there was a big twist in the story. We wanted to sort of delight and surprise people, whereby people probably had no chance of sort of seeing that twist. But when you look back, it has that sort of delicious feeling of like, oh, if I had actually connected those things, I could have seen it. Which I think, you know, a lot of things do. You look at, you know, probably my favourite little twist that a lot of people have is Sixth Sense, right? Where at the end you realise what's going on. And we wanted to have something a little bit like that, where at the end we're like, oh. And actually, you know, you get that a little bit before the end, and then there's some more things sort of afterwards. But I wanted it to be very, very narratively rich, because shooters, I mean, you have campaigns in shooters, but in most of those shooters, I think it's fair to say that they're not incredibly cerebral.
They're not known for the best. I hear you on that. I would even say, you know, they're. Not to be too generic, but obviously there was the Halo games, that Halo 1 through 3, which were like freaking incredible. It was like watching, iconic. Yeah, it's like playing one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time. I still remember to this day playing through Halo 3 with my brother, split screen, and like both of us were like just enthralled all the way through to the end. But then also, you know, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare in the mid 2000s were. I mean, it was incredible. The story in those games was incredible. And, you know, there's some other games after that too, but really those are kind of what I think of when I think first person shooter story games. I think Halo, but then if we're talking like kind of realistic shooters, I think Call of Duty. I still do. I could never really do the Battlefield ones. They were entertaining enough, but they weren't really ones that I remember. Bad Company was pretty good, but you're right? Like there are a lot of campaigns out there. I mean, you think of the old days, like Medal of Honor, you know, but it's always been about the gameplay, right? So I always appreciate a good attempt at a story.
Ours was story first. I mean, that was the guideline for the vision that I laid out for the team, which was, you know, this is a story, right? We know it has to be a good game. We know it has to be, you know, have all these elements, and, you know, we're going to build on that and the mechanics that go behind it to make it a great experience. But ultimately, it is mechanics that are within a story, right? You want to feel like you are the person playing through the film. Was talked about a few times. Right. But at the same time, there's not much of a film, no matter how good your shooting mechanics are, if you don't have a story behind it that's actually keeping people intrigued and interested. But the 80s were a fairly depressing time. And the more obviously I was alive in the 80s, but not everybody in the audience was. And actually, even I had forgotten some of the things. I mean, you can argue we're in a fairly dystopian time now, and I would probably subscribe to that. But the 80s weren't really most jolly time either. There's some great things about them. There's great music, which is obviously wonderful for making a game, because you can use that music. Some interesting clothing trends back then. Some interesting hairstyle trends back then. But, you know, quite a colourful, interesting time, but against actually a backdrop that when you dig into it, certainly, you know, we obviously had a UK kind of bias to it. You know, IGI in our game was based in this particular case with a UK operative and an English operative. And then, you know, you obviously had a lot going on in the sort of 70s, 80s in the UK with Northern Ireland. And yeah, a fairly grim and grey backdrop. And in some ways, I think that makes a really good background for something which is, you know, quite bright and explosive as a story.
You had the Falklands, right? So
the Falklands, which again with the World Cup has come up recently, right? With the Argentinian team waving their flag and stuff.
That's right. I have a good friend who's got English heritage, and he was quick to remind me of all that. I'm like, I didn't even think about that. There's some bad blood there.
It's very, very recent, actually, that, you know, with the World Cup and that flag being shown, and then all of the rhetoric on both sides since, you know, it just shows that those sort of things hang around and nobody really forgets them.
Right. Yeah, definitely not anytime soon, especially when you're not too far off. Like we're still in a generation where people were involved in that. So no, I hear you on that. And I always thought the 80s were, it's an interesting era. I was born in 96. So the 80s to me, as I got older, I realized actually how close my birth was to them, because you get older and you're like, damn, the 2000s, I feel like that was yesterday, right? And I'm like, well, the 80s were just before the 90s, buddy. So that wasn't too far off from you. So it's like, man, I wasn't too far off from them. But I always loved, a lot of the stuff that came out in the 80s, Scarface comes to mind, right? Like a lot of those kind of stuff. I was a big fan of some of those later Rocky movies, of course. So to me, that's always what it was. But you're right. When you actually look into it, you think the Reagan era, Gorbachev tear down that wall. It might have been, 1990, 1991. I don't remember what year that was.
I can't remember.
Yeah. But still, there was a lot of strife in the 80s, reminiscent in a little bit to the 60s, the early 60s. It's kind of, I always think of George Lucas when he talks about Star Wars, how it rhymes. It's like poetry, it rhymes. I always think time is like that as well. Time, it rhymes,
Well, and also you see that in fashion, right, as well. Mm-hmm. Fashion, things go out, they come back in, and, there's some things like flares. Why did flares ever come back in? Why were they ever a thing in the first place? But, even
the short shorts. Trends, right? The short shorts are back. Yeah.
Not for me. But also, there's like high-waisted, what do they call it?
High-waisted leg. Yep, totally, 100%.
That was like an 80s thing, and that's back. So I think it's really interesting how things sort of go in cycles. But now, without going into politics, right? It's kind of a very divisive time across the world. In the UK, in the US, obviously that's a big thing, and then Eastern Europe, you have obviously all the trouble there. We have the interesting stuff in the Gulf and everything else.
There's always stuff happening in there. Yeah,
it's quite a tumultuous time right now, as well. So I don't think we necessarily always remember how challenging some of those things were. But we do remember things like entertainment and the movies and the music and
of course
the colors, I suppose, of that era. So they're more memorable probably because they're more pleasant to think about.
I think about there is in a game called, I don't know if you ever played Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic in the early 2000s. Cool. Jolie Bindo. He's kind of the grouch Jedi who's kind of more cynical, and you're the hero and you're trying to win the war, and it's the biggest, most important thing ever is happening right now, and he kind of scoffs at you and tells you, it's like, you think this is the most important thing because you're involved in it. It's like, 40 years ago I was involved in something else, and at the time that was the biggest thing, and it's like, then there's going to be something after this, and it's like, you think about it, and it's like, man, when were we not in some kind of crisis? You know what I mean? Like it's like there's always something happening. It seems like.
But that gives me hope. Actually, in a funny way, that gives me hope. Maybe I'll look back on this in a year or two and think, "What an idiot!" Wouldn't be the first time. But like it gives me hope, because when you see this, like right now, I think it's fair to say that there'll be a lot of people in the industry right now who say, we're really in trouble. Huge layoffs, huge buyouts. You've got what people are suggesting, and I'm inclined to agree, could well be even bigger layoffs from EA, what with the acquisition that's just gone on, them coming out of being public and now, being saddled with a lot of debt. We've already got, tens and tens of thousands of people being laid off, looking for jobs. The job hunting. I've had conversations with people who are more senior than I am, and I've been around a while. People I looked up to like a long time ago, I've had conversations with them. They're looking for work at the moment. I'm currently looking for what's next as well. And I think the universal feeling is how are we going to get another job? Because we're actually quite confident in our ability to talk to people if we get an interview. But you can't get an interview because, you're saving, sheaths of these. Thank you. We really appreciate the amount of effort that you put into your application. We decided to go with a candidate this time. You can't break through that. And, now people are saying it's all automated. I don't know if it is or not. I do know there's a couple of companies I wouldn't mind working for that applied for a couple of different roles, which I know I can do. I know I'm more than qualified for. And I've got these same form letter responses. So is there something wrong with my CV? Well, I've had 5-6 different people, look at it. Of course, everyone unfortunately tells you their own ways to edit it.
Yeah.
So you end up going backwards and forwards and saying, I don't know what's right. I'm not going to pay anyone to do it as a paid service. That to me is a mug game. There's no reason at all to pay anyone to do it. So I've had feedback from people I respect. A number of them I'm waiting for feedback actually from somebody else more recently based on a recent update to it. But the problem is I can tell you now, if I take myself, for example, out of the equation, then this person who I won't name because I think that'd be unfair to do so, who is a big name. If I said their name, you'd know who they were instantly. And I had a conversation with them in the last week, and they basically said, I don't have a place anymore. Not because I don't think I can have a place, but because I can't even get past these automatic, if they are automatic emails. I can't talk to someone about what I've done and show my enthusiasm, my passion, and what I can give them because they won't give me a chance because no one gives that opportunity. And that's someone who, if I were in a position of, being able to hire someone to head up a studio, I would 100% put them on my team if they wanted to be on that team, 100%, because what they have and what they give, and they're a good person too, right? So to go full circle, this does still give me hope because it feels terrible now. But then back in 2008, I actually was lucky. I was at that point I was at ZeniMax Online, and we were building the team for Elder Scrolls Online. So I wasn't affected. I had moved. I was really fortuitous, and I moved before the wheels fell off the bus at that time. But a lot of people you talk about how awful 2008 was.
Right.
Well, we recovered, and we built teams and we built studios, and people that you hadn't really, I say you hadn't even heard of then. I don't know when they were founded, but studios that are really well respected. I mean, one that comes to mind probably because I'm such a D&D fan and RPG fan, and I love their games. Larian, for example. Larian weren't a big name then, in my opinion, at least back then. I don't even know when they were formed, as I say. But now, new studio, fairly big, working on great games with at least one of the biggest releases in the last few years with Baldur's Gate 3. I'm sure that the title they're working on now will do exceedingly well as well as that.
It's a new Divinity, I want to say.
Yeah, it's in the Divinity universe. I don't recall off the top of my head what the name is, but I use them as an example because I think they're a great studio. I love what I've heard from them and everything else. But it gives me hope because they weren't, in my mind, a big part of the 2008 cycle. No doubt someone will message me on LinkedIn and say I'm an idiot and they actually were around before then. I cannot help it but to now actually Google when they're founded. Their founding date was 1996. So there you go.
I know what you're saying, and just to speak on that real quick, because I've been talking. One of the blessings is getting a lot of perspectives around the gaming industry by talking to so many different people, and the common denominator with this whole thing is exactly what you're saying, which is people know people who are incredible at what they do. They've been involved in studios and projects for 20, 30 years, and they're probably in the top percentile of what they do. And they're all looking for a job. And I
Competition's insane right now. Insane.
That's what, I was talking to Michael Gummelt. He's over at That's No Moon making Crossfire. He was saying, I don't even know what you do if you're trying to break into the industry. Like, I don't even know what you do if it's like you don't have a resume to compete versus a Rich Barham or a who the heck knows, right?
I worked with students actually on my resume. You see it if you look. I worked for a few years with Falmouth University in Southwest UK with game students, and Tanya Krasinska, who's quite a well-known games academic. I think she's retired now, but she was a friend of a friend. And we spoke about me coming there, and I said, "Look, I'm not a academic. It's just not my thing." And they obviously wanted someone with a bit of pedigree to come there and give a bit of authenticity to the games course when it was starting up.
Yeah.
So I went there and sort of took a title and sort of worked kind of part-timey, being part of the people talking about the course and then giving some lectures. And I really enjoyed working with the teams of students there. I didn't necessarily enjoy all of the academic side of it, but I really enjoyed working with the students there. But the big problem I see, and it's not a Falmouth problem, it's a academia problem, is that the nature of it is that they have a large cohort of students, and they have to tell those students the same thing, which is, go out there and do your thing, all the while knowing that the chances of most of those people having any opportunity of getting a job is fractional. It's a tiny fraction.
Yeah. It's a scary time, but you know what? I as I said to him, and as I said to Rob Chesney as well, it's the thing that gives me hope is, you see a lot of independent studios formed from veterans of these studios where people are being laid off. They're just saying, we'll just do it ourselves. Now, there's a lot more to it than just saying, hey, we're going to make our own studio and it starts today. Yeah. There's a lot more to it. You said it yourself, right? When you're making IGI, you need funding. You need seed capital. So I just wonder if you tell me what you've been seeing on this front in terms of people looking to invest in maybe these VC firms. I don't know how really it works on that end, but I'm assuming people are ready to invest in these new studios. I
can tell you with first-hand experience, unfortunately, for this.
Yeah, so, that's true. You just told me. Yeah.
Last year, I will say this. I think there's probably nothing I would rather do than start another studio now.
Yeah.
But the problem with that, and I'll go into a little bit more depth about my experiences sort of last year. But the problem with that is I am not in a position where I can gather a team and make that game. And here's why, is the people that I know, the people that I would want to have on that team, and I could go into this, but probably that would take far too long, would be people who have experience. There'd be people who are masters or at least very adept at their craft. Because the way that game studios need to be built now, in my opinion, is small. They need to be built with a small nucleus, working heavily with co-development and outsourcing, and most of their assets should be coming through ways that don't require you to have a huge art team, for example. Now, those people that I'm talking about, they're masters of their craft, or they're very adept at it. They are not usually in an early stage in life, just purely based on the experience they need. Which means that they, like me, have families, they have commitments, they have, things they need to pay for. Which means the chances of me being able to gather those people without funding is zero.
Yeah.
People just can't do it, and I can't do it. I can't be just working on something. Now, younger people who are living at home, who are in university, supported, living in halls,
they can take those risks. Yeah.
And this is the problem now, where I'd very much like to build a studio. It's the forefront of my mind even today, but I just do not. The trudge of that is for something where they say, haha, well, this is just an idea. Everyone has ideas. You know, we all laughed, you know, a few years ago about ideas guys, you know, people emailing your studio, I've gone over a game, and we're like, cool story, bro. Everybody else has too.
Yeah.
And that's true. But now where we're saying, you know, actually there is no real funding to support us getting that to a prototype. Well, that's an issue, isn't it? Because now we are ideas guys too. We're not in a studio where we have, you know, 5-6 people to work through prototypes while everyone works on DLC or anything else. So when you're founding a new studio, you need somebody to support that. People just aren't really willing to support that now. If you don't have a playable prototype, there's really virtually nothing around to support that. And last year, excuse me, last year I worked on 2 separate ideas. So when I was fundraising for Antimatter some time ago, we were working on a single player title. We were told, yeah, great, but we got feedback. We want multiplayer. And I thought last year, you know what, I need to really put a lot of work in. So I put a lot of work into market study, what's out there, what could do, what isn't being done. And I came up with a concept, single player and multiplayer, 2 separate decks. And I actually focused primarily on the multiplayer because the multiplayer to me was quite revolutionary. It built on other things and no one else is doing it. Now I've targeted primarily people like Tencent, people like you know, all of the big publishers who had been, you know, investing, and said, look, nobody's doing this. Look at this. And I actually have a sheet on my desktop of the feedback, and the feedback was, this looks great, nobody's doing this. If it blows up, it could be huge, as an example. But we are not in an investment phase right now. However, we have been seeing lots of, their words, not mine, kids in university who are doing great things with prototypes. You should do that too. Yeah, which would be great if I was in a position to do that. But that was exactly their feedback. Now, I spoke to a lot of publishers, a lot of different people about this idea, and every single one of them said, this idea is really different, it's really new, and it's really interesting and could make a lot of money, but we are not investing right now.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, you saw people like studios that were built. So there were some of these investors that built studios behind a single person. I never knew how those people were fortunate enough to get into that conversation. But look at Magic Pixel, right? Magic Pixel Castle, I think they were called, building an MMO around one of the former Blizzard guys, closed down, right? They're closed down. And a lot of those studios actually in the last sort of year, 18 months, they then got closed down. So not only were they not investing, that, you know, all the Asian investors were pulling back out of Europe and the US and being a lot more focused on investing in their own market. Korea, you know, my wife is Korean, so, you know, I have quite a sort of finger on the pulse of the Korean market just purely out of interest there because of that.
It's good to have, I mean, they're doing a lot of things right over there. So,
and there's a lot of interesting things going on in Korea. My single player idea was actually linked in a way that I won't discuss too publicly, but was actually linked to some elements of sort of Korean ways of doing things. But again, you know, to come back to the high line of it, I have a team that in my head that I know I could go to if I could pay those people the money to pay their bills, who are, I mean, just a fabulous team. And we have a couple of concepts which are very strong. But, you know, the endless grind of, please, sir, can I have some cash? You
gotta have the money for it. You're right. And then they're gonna try to control stuff once, because they have the money. Then the vision changes, right? Like there's a lot that goes into. You could always just crowdsource, like Ashes of Creation. You know that, right? We all know what happened there. Right. Yeah.
I could hope to be Star Citizen, couldn't I? But I don't think I'm going to do that either. You know, I agree. The problem is that for every Star Citizen which has got, you know, a bajillion pounds behind it, or dollars in that case, There's 1,000 more. It's like people that say, this is the era of the indie, and then they point to like two extraordinary outlier indie games as being the way of the planet.
That probably aren't qualified as, like, I just had this conversation. I don't know are we calling like Expedition 33 indie in the same way that we're calling, all these Steam games that pop up indie? Like, there is a little bit of a blurred line when people use the word indie. You know what I'm saying?
People also don't know what it is. I think a lot of people also don't know what it is. I mean, I think you could argue, and I think you could argue with some level of guarantee that people would agree that if you don't know what indie AA, AAA, and 4A, which is another one, or there's also the triple I that appeared at some point, then I think if you don't know what they are, then I think that's fair, because you could ask 10 game developers, all of whom's names at least you respect, whose back catalogue, whose experience you respect, and you would probably get shades of grey on your answer, because they would probably have some similarity. Well, your budget's got to be about this. Well, your team size has got to be about this, right? But I'm seeing people talk about games as being indie games when they had a team of 100 and a 30 million budget. Well, I tell you what, I'll make indie games for that budget and that team size all day, every day. No worries.
Sign me up.
That's great. But I think realistically, you have to look at it as how you build studios. And I talk a lot about this sort of stuff on LinkedIn, and when I've done work with studios that need help on organization, of what does a studio look like today. And in my mind, if it's a new studio, it needs to be very unpopular, I actually think, in some ways, because a lot of people want jobs, but you can only give so many people jobs, right? There's that's unpopular. And the second thing, in my opinion, which is probably going to get me lots of flack, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's the truth, is that if you're building a studio right now, there needs to be a small amount of very experienced people. And I think that's very sad for people who are coming into the industry, and I feel very badly for them. But I think people coming into the industry right now, they need to focus on one of two things. One, go and work for one of the big outsourcing co-dev people, because right now, even though a lot of them have had layoffs, I suspect that they will hire again, and they may hire junior. Or do what we were just talking about, which is build your own studio, keep it small, do it where you don't need any money. So essentially do it for free. If it doesn't work, you lost time. You gained experience, but you lost time. Get advice from people in the industry, get advice ideally from people who aren't going to charge you for it. I mean, I do consulting, so it certainly isn't me, because I definitely charge. But there are
paying
lots
for
of
this podcast. I'm kidding.
There are lots of people out there. There are lots of people out there who give this sort of advice for free, and they should definitely go on that. Not just looking to their tutors, because the problem is that with all due respect to a lot of games tutors, many of them haven't worked in the industry.
Right.
And if you haven't worked in the industry, you can teach someone how to use an engine and you can give your opinion, but it's very much different once you've worked inside the industry. So I think for me, people starting out, they need to build their own experience themselves now, or possibly with one of the big outsourcing or co-dev firms. I think for studios that are being built now by people like me, those people brave enough to actually do it, they need people with experience, because you shouldn't have too many people, because you need to pay a little bit more for people, of course, or a lot more in some cases. Mm-hmm. But those people do not need to be told anything. They can own what they do, they can contribute, they have a voice, they have confidence. They are going to have experienced a lot of things that you need to experience not to make the same mistakes again. The problem that I see right now, and I've talked about this many times in LinkedIn posts and articles, is that people have an interesting mix of gamer arrogance, whereby a lot of people are like, I made a studio and I'm a really good dev, therefore I'm a good leader. That's not true, firstly.
Right.
And secondly, I'm going to build a company. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to have more money than Elon Musk. Also not true for so many reasons. But and then what they will do, not because they're any less smart than people like me, but because they haven't, in many cases, learned from it because they don't have that, they're going to go and make all the same mistakes I made, and the mistakes I made were the same mistakes other people make. So we have this horrible cycle of these type of errors. You know, I work with studios even quite recently that I went to because I thought, you know, I can really help. But, you know, where the founder wouldn't listen, where the founder knew best. Why? Because they were a very successful game developer. But they were a very bad leader, a very poor leader, you know, and that was impacting their team, but they couldn't see it because their team will not tell them. And so, you know, that is repeating the same mistakes that are there again. And I think the thing that I always wanted to say to this leader that I tried to, and they absolutely did not listen. But the thing I always want to say is, if you are someone who runs a game company and you don't want to bother about the leadership stuff, you don't want to do one-on-ones with your team, you don't want to hear about what their feedback really is, not about the game, about how you're doing things. You know, you don't want to trust people because you don't know how to trust people. You don't want to empower people because you don't want to empower people. These are all very common, very junior flaws, basically, in leaders. If you don't want to do that, that is actually fine. You concentrate on the game, hire somebody who has the experience to do that properly so you don't have to deal with it. It's that simple.
Right.
You can still retain, you know, there is a level of retaining power, but realistically, if you hire someone with experience, they've had power, they're not drunk by it, they don't want, you know, they don't want power for power's sake. And I think that's a big mistake that people make. And I saw, like I say, even recently working with somebody at a founder level, whereby, you know, they don't want to do this stuff, but they also don't trust anybody else in their 360 whatsoever. You know, I had conversations with this very person where they were saying to me, I don't trust all these people around me. You know, and the one thing that I think people forget in those conversations is, if you're telling someone that you don't trust anyone around them, that extends to the person you're talking to.
Right.
Because don't tell me that I'm the one person that you trust, because I know that you're unable to,
exactly.
Yeah, you are unable to trust the people around you. And you know, in the case I'm thinking of now, the people that this person said they didn't trust, they worked with for sort of 5 years. I'm new. And you're telling me you want me to keep an eye on people you've worked with for this long? Your company's successful. Yeah. Nothing's caught fire, but you don't trust these people. What do they need to do to earn your trust?
Right.
They never can. And here's why: because your founder paranoia, you know, your fear of loss, your fear of losing power or money or something that is intangible is too much. And that, you know, these are all bad leadership things. You know, it's not calling someone out specifically, but they're common things.
Right.
But they are easy. And this is, you know, one of the things I do fear is that, you know, we have a lot of people who are good developers who are terrible leaders, but those people are frightened to get help. And a lot of the time, if they do look for help, you know, they can be taken advantage of by some of the people who are very ruthlessly ambitious, who don't have the experience. They have a bit of experience, maybe more than the founder, but, you know, they want that power and maybe want it too much. And I think what often happens is very senior people with a lot of experience are feared because that level of experience is feared by sort of newer founders. So they go for someone sort of in the middle who's got some experience, maybe a bit more than them. And a lot of the time, you know, the profile of those people is that they haven't truly had that sort of level of power, you know, so they want it and wanting the power. You know, we talked about this at the start of the conversation.
Right.
If you want power too much, then usually you're not the right person to have it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So by fearing experience, they turn to people who are more likely to do the things that they fear in the first place. And it's a horrible situation, but I am seeing it happening right now. And I think it's, you know, across the industry, it's wider spread than people fear. And ultimately that hurts teams, because teams will stay because they know that things are unstable in the industry right now. But if somebody approaches them, and recruiters will approach people, or that right job comes, or the thing we're all hoping for, which is the market turns and stops being an employer's market and starts becoming a bit more balanced, or who knows, we could go back to COVID where it was completely employee focused, where the employees held all the power. Then those people will see no reason to tolerate it anymore, because they're tolerating sort of bad behaviours in leadership, because they say, well, if I don't continue to tolerate it here, maybe I'll go somewhere else. I've always had very strong principles about how I want to behave with integrity, and I don't want to work somewhere that I don't feel shares those values. But a lot of people don't have that luxury.
Yeah, something that when you're talking about this level of senior leadership, something that I've noticed at that level is you have people who, in their mind, they can do no wrong, and you've kind of alluded to it a bit, but where they'll ask you for input on something only to disregard it, counter with some corpos, lingo and corporate jargon, and then do what they want to do anyway. And then you're kind of there wondering, well, then what is my point of being here in the first place? If you're just going to ask me my opinion, I'm going to give it to you, and then you're going to acknowledge it and disregard it using a bunch of fancy verbiage. It's unfortunate.
I've left the job because of exactly that, frankly. Because yes, you want to get paid because it pays your bills. That's obvious. Right. Yes, you want to have the job at the right level, doing technically the right things. But if you're not valued, if someone doesn't value you, and if someone doesn't listen to you, what does that equate to? They don't value you. If someone doesn't value you, that erodes your self-respect, and I think it erodes your mental health too, really. And I think we don't talk enough about mental health in the games industry. If somebody feels as though they're just a placeholder, to use industry terms, if someone just feels that they're a placeholder, they're just there, they don't really have much power to actually affect change. And when they speak up, as you say, there's always a reason not to do it. Somebody said to me, in a response to one of my posts in the last sort of month, they said something like, it really hit home to me when you talked about how founders don't actually act on what they hear from their people enough. My response to their comment was, there is always something more interesting to do. And usually in the case we're talking about now, with more junior founders who have got CEO powers or founder powers, without necessarily experience, is usually what that is I need to take care of something on the game. I need to make sure we get the team through this, through this release. I need to make sure there's always something. And you know what? That is never a person thing. That is always a product thing or an organizational thing. It is never about people. When you see that, 100% always, it will not be. I would bet more money than I have that you would see that all the time. It's never about people. And I think one of the things, I talked to a lot of people recently, especially about these sort of issues in one-to-ones. And I think one of the things that was the most universally agreed was, everyone's a little bit tired about how little this industry cares for people now. We all know that it's ultimately going to be ruled by people who are earning far more money. And I'm not talking about CEOs like I was a CEO. I'm talking about the big CEOs who are very far removed from anything other than ultimately shareholder responsibilities and bottom line. The Microsofts is probably the word of the moment, right? Those people do not care about the developers that work for them, and I cannot get on board with that. I can't. It might cost me jobs in the future to have said so, But I cannot get on board with the fact that you completely ignore the talent that is putting their heart and soul into your game. I can't tolerate that, because without them, we don't have games. And I think there's an opportunity for people to show that, continue to show that, and I think that the ramifications of the actions with so many layoffs may well mean that we see that impact across the landscape in terms of the qualities, the quantities of release. We're already seeing a bit of a backlash. The teams from ZeniMax Media are protesting. Some people are going to unionize or trying to unionize, but we've seen backlash to unionization with Rockstar. There's the case about people being fired who were coincidentally part of the union. I don't have comment on that. I don't know whether it's fair to those people or to the company. I don't know the situation. I don't personally think unionization is the answer. And I'm not saying that because I've been an executive for a long time. I'm saying that because I just haven't really seen too many situations where unions have changed the sort of things we want to change. Do I have the answer? No, I don't have the answer across the industry, but I can tell you the answer 100% across the studio, which is the people in charge of the studio need to always be in a position to protect their team, and they need to have that as one of their key priorities if we're going to change the way that we work in this industry.
I'm in communication right now with a handful of individuals that I hope decide to do this with me, and they work for various companies or have worked for various companies that are under Microsoft's thumb.
Right.
And I really am curious because with some of these people, they've been working at these companies for 25, 30 years. And to be told to pack up your bags, it can't be something. It's got to be something that invokes a lot of feelings to where I want to hear what they think in terms of unionization. I want to hear what they think about that, because I can't imagine giving my life to a studio and then on a whim, hey, this is what we're doing. You and hundreds of other people need to go home, and here's your severance. Good luck to you. Thanks for your time here. I simply can't imagine what that would be like. So it's a touchy thing, and it's kind of those things too, because I can't say what I want to say with unfortunately.
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. I mean, I ran Antimatter Games for just under 10 years, so it's not on the stage of where we were. But when I was told we're going to close you down because
same feeling. Yeah,
we want to concentrate. It wasn't because you guys are failing. No, we met every milestone. We were, frankly, outperforming for the resources we were given, which I was constantly feeding back were not the resources we needed. But even doing that for a little bit just under 10 years, that was inconceivable to me about the reasons for doing it. I strongly disagree with to this day.
Yeah.
And I think that was the wrong thing to do by people who had poor intentions. But we were a small studio, so you could argue, if you were thinking about it from the other side, we weren't making money, we were developing a game, we were doing that. Then you pivot to these other people who are making games, Battlefield, and then getting laid off, even though the CEO is getting 38 million. I just think about it. I just think about those people's salaries, right? So if you look at an average studio, this is a bit different for locations, but let's just go with it. If you look at an average studio of, say, 30 to 50 people, let's just look at it across the world because it'll even out. The UK is paid a lot different to the US and so on. But realistically, right, your burn rate for a studio of, say, 30 to 50 people, working on an average game, you could argue, and we're talking in really, really broad brushstrokes here, 3 to 5 million a year, right? That's really broad, and a million people could tell me why that's nonsense. And I agree, it's very broad and it's very, but. So let's say that's a 30 to 50 person studio in somewhere in the world. divide that 3 to 5 million, into a salary bonus of 38 million, and then think how many jobs you save, and then think how many lives you impact. And I know that you can just say this is the ultra capitalist situation that we're all in now. Elon Musk could probably make quite a lot of games and not even notice it too. I don't think he's going to, and actually I sort of hope he doesn't. But it's don't get me wrong, I would love to be able to have more money to support my family. I'm looking for work right now myself, but I think there's always a limit between understanding the people that work for you and supporting them and gratuitous accumulation of wealth. And I think the sooner that we stop having CEOs, a CEO should be paid a multiple of what people that work for them. I agree with that. I've been a CEO. I do agree there's a lot of responsibility. I do a lot. But there's a multiple, and then there's that.
Yeah.
And I think
it screams corruption to me. Not to get too like, that's not right. There's something off. When you see something like that, something's off. That's a huge number. So
it's a huge number, but then what is the salary bonus going to be for the new-ish Xbox CEO? The Xbox CEO who has no games background, obviously no real genuine interest in games, and to be fair, I think you could argue was brought in not to be a CEO but an executioner. What will her salary be? I don't like to call her out because I know a lot of people have, and I'm critical of her because she doesn't have a games background. I think that's fundamentally broken for that role. But I also think that she's been brought in either to prepare her for a bigger CEO role somewhere else, maybe even Microsoft itself someday.
Definitely.
But realistically, you look at Xbox, you look at the landmark names that are under Xbox, and then they have a CEO who knows nothing about games, knows a lot about business, it seems, but then look at the background there. There's not so many years of experience there either. It doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And perhaps, I'm sure there's a lot of people who can tell me about how smart this person is. Absolutely. Don't want to call just them out. I've already spoken about, the Battlefield side of things too. All of these people, there is a self-focus there, which is about their careers, and there is a complete detachment from the people that are making the product that try to get them there. Maybe this means I will never be the CEO of EA or Xbox. That's probably true anyway. But I hope that whoever is, at some point, we see a little bit more of a return to people who put this forward. And actually, you see it in Japan, right? You'll see Nintendo, we don't perform so well. The CEO cuts their bonus so that they can preserve the salaries.
Right.
They recognize the cost of living increase. So even though they've maybe not had the year they want to have, they increase salaries for the workers 10%. Why? Because they work there. Go back to Microsoft. Blizzard, who I loved and still do, probably gave me one of the most, amazing experiences of my life working for them. They used to give you a tankard at 2 years, I think it was, a sword at 5, a shield at 10, a ring at 15, I believe, and I think it was a helmet at 20. Someone will probably tell us that I've got that the wrong way around. I'm sorry if I did. Those were for loyalty. What price loyalty now? That is a radical change from the idea of valuing veteran people, not even veterans really, we look at it 2 years, wanting people to stay with you, wanting people to want to stay with you and rewarding them for doing so. Whereas now, you can be moved on because, maybe if they have to rehire, they can hire someone cheaper with less experience.
Now, Rich, we're talking about something here that I've been pretty critical of, and I've put out my opinions, and I've been met with a lot of vitriol from people who don't know anything about anything. People just have opinions online, and it's something that I have a particular problem with. Actually had someone call me out, and deservedly so. I can't be getting into arguments with people in comment sections, which I tend to do, especially on shorts. But I've been very critical of Phil Spencer and their decisions with Game Pass, and I've been particularly upset. And I think it's because I'm now relatively close to people and situations, and I've come to become friends with people in the industry, and it's been really a blessing in that sense. But I don't understand how someone can fail upward for so long. And I'm not going to say anyone's particular name. I know I said Phil Spencer, but he's an easy target. And then everybody all of a sudden, like Asha comes in and she just clears house. And I'm not even criticizing her on that. I think maybe there's an extent where it needed to happen. But I tend to blame leadership and people who made the decisions that led up to this moment. But people are so quick to, and I want to hear your thought on this, to blame all of these studios underneath the shell of Microsoft and Xbox for making games that nobody wants. And there's an element to that too. But who do you think, like, what's your overall take? There's a lot of people, I'm telling you, if you post a short criticizing Asia for letting all these people go, you're going to be met with a lot of people saying, well, these people shouldn't be making terrible games. That's why they got fired. Yeah, exactly.
So I think there's a couple of points here I have, in my opinion, on it, which probably is no more popular than yours, if I'm honest. But so in studios and with publishers, you should have it internally at every level. There are green light processes, right? Where ultimately from that idea stage, you propose games, then you start making games, and you have a no-go opportunity at so many levels. So I think the bottom line here, and a lot of people don't understand that process because they don't work in games as well, especially people in comments. Right. They don't realize that you don't say, right, here's, X million currency, go and make your game, we'll see you in 3 years when it's done. That doesn't happen, right? IO Interactive, for example, Matsuda-san would come and he'd want to hold the controller and play the game, and he was quite well known for that. Right? And if your game was god awful, I can't believe he would say, you know what, this is terrible, but carry on spending our money, that'd be awesome. There has to be accountability at multiple levels, right? So, for example, if you have the head of Blizzard, and the head of Blizzard is signing off in those ultimately, they need to know what they're signing off on, and they need to see the reasons for doing it. But if that all stops at them, and then everyone else is like, well, it's your fault because you're the head of Blizzard. So, nobody above you has any visibility on that. What? That's not true, firstly. And secondly, let's say it was. Where's the problem there? The problem there is that your organizational responsibility and accountability goes up here and then stops. No, that isn't functionally effective. You need to have visibility at all these levels. People need to be asking these sort of questions. I remember I went to a meeting a very long time ago with at Blizzard in Europe, and there was a guy called Bruce Hack, who is a very, I believe he sat on the Vivendi board at the time. It was way before Activision. We weren't bought by Activision until around the time I was leaving. But I remember we were talking about our plans, and we were talking about everything from development, support, through to marketing and everything else. And I won't say which department it was because it would be indirectly calling someone out. But I remember someone presented a plan, and Bruce Hack utterly eviscerated them because their plan wasn't, in his opinion, very well thought out. He probably could have been a little bit more considerate in the way that he did it, but my limited experience of Bruce Hack, who is a very, very experienced executive, is that he was straight to the point in doing it. And the point I'm trying to make is, even back then, when you could argue that, say, this element of a plan towards what we're doing with World of Warcraft over the next 6 months is relatively minor compared to a big conglomerate, it was something that a quite senior executive was sitting in the room, listening to it, and then questioning quite radically why we were doing this and what we were doing this and expecting it to be justified. So to go up all the way into a Microsoft-sized organization now and blame that on the studios and say they shouldn't make crap games. No, they shouldn't make crap games. No one wants to make a crap game, and that's the thing I see too much in comments, which I find aggravating too. Yeah. Some developers are better than others. Some leaders are better than others. Some visions are clearer than others. There's all those things. But ultimately, I would say the percentage of game developers overall who want to make a bad game is probably zero.
Yeah, hopefully, right?
I mean, you'd always hope that, because then the only reason for someone not to be in that 100% is that they are so disengaged with either their company or project that they're actually looking to sabotage it. Because if you're not actively looking to effectively sabotage it, then you want to make a good game, because that's what we do. You know, whether you want to get into the kind of fancy argument about video games are art, or whether you just see it as an experience, or whether you just see it as a money-making exercise, those are sort of your three tranches, I would argue. Whichever of those you sit in, you want it to be successful, money-wise, as an experience, or as an artistic endeavor. Any one of those, you want it to be successful. Otherwise, what is your purpose in being here? We're not to say that banking or accountancy isn't fun. I don't think it is. I can understand why somebody in a, let's call it more corporate environment might not see a level of pride and excitement and fulfillment in what they do. Right. But whether you're a coder, an artist, a writer, or anything in between, you should be, if you're anything to do with the game, you should be wanting that to be successful, if for no other reason than the pure selfishness of it being later on your resume.
Right.
Right. So I think that's one thing I see a lot, which is very frustrating, where people are like, well, or they allude to the fact that people made bad games on purpose. Bad games do get made. Yeah. Usually because the idea was bad, the execution was bad, the vision.
There's a bunch of reasons for that. Yeah, exactly. But it's not. The thing is people. Well, I mean, there's always going to be people who say contradictory things or whatever's hot or easy to say. It's easy to just say, they shouldn't be making bad games. Like, well, it's not that simple. Well, now that was going to be kind of, how I wanted to wrap everything up was in terms of the market, where it's at right now, the people losing their jobs, is there anything that you can say in terms of messaging out to those people developers, whether it be someone new looking to get in, whether it be someone long-term who they're kind of perplexed by the situation they've now found themselves that they never find themselves in. Any words of wisdom, anything optimistic in terms of the future, what you see, your experience, you can kind of speak on?
Yeah, I mean, how much use it will be to anyone given the state of the industry right now, I don't know. I'd love to help people, but I'm aware that I'm as limited as most people, and there are some great people on LinkedIn. Amir obviously has had a lot of press about the help he's given. There's another guy called, I think his name is Tom Plodger, who posts a lot of remote roles. Or I'm sorry if I've murdered their names as well, pronunciation wise. But I think from my own perspective, what I can say is, to new people coming into the industry, I think they just have to realize the reality of where it is, which is not a great place right now. As I think I said before, consider, whilst you have very little to no responsibilities and outgoing, make something while you can, and work part-time around it or whatever else. Build something of your own. Get advice to avoid the mistakes of the past. And if you must work for somebody else, go and try and find work for somewhere where you'll experience a lot of different work and learn fast. And I think right now that's in co-dev or outsourcing, if you can get it. If you can get a job in a regular studio, well, that's great. And, then obviously we hope that you don't get hit by more layoffs, but there's still more going to come.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would say to new people getting into the industry, with my incredible sympathy, because it's always been hard and now it's just ridiculous.
Sure.
And people such as myself who've got experience who are looking, I stand behind my experience. I think I'm very good at what I do, and I'm still looking. So I know that I don't think it's about what you've done. I don't think it's about your portfolio. I don't think it's personal, and I think people have to recognise it's the situation and not them. That doesn't make it any better, and that certainly doesn't pay your bills, and I'm acutely aware of that myself.
But you said something earlier, the mental health aspect. That's going to be the biggest thing among this, right?
Utterly crushing, and there's precious little support for that in many ways. I think what I would say is what I am trying to do is what I'd recommend people to do, which is diversify, which sounds a bit of a catchy catchword with no meaning, but by that I mean I'm trying to start something up outside of games as a hobby project to see if it makes money. Why? Because ultimately, if it makes money, I've got some way of earning income. Secondly, I'm still exploring starting another studio. Why? Because, can you hear me? Sorry, I think I lost.
Oh yeah, I hear you. Nothing lost yet.
I'm still exploring starting another studio because that's an endearing desire where I want to work with people that I want to work with. I want to treat people well, and I want to make great product. I think those pillars are foundational to make a great studio, and they're what people should be thinking. So I still think about that, but I'm also aware of the financial realities of investment, and I'm also very tired of the idea of going around grubbing for money.
I hear you.
On the third kind, keep looking, but the more senior you are, the smaller amount of roles there are, and the more bizarre the recruitment is. I think I would say don't rely on recruiters. No disrespect to recruiters, but I have had, with my experience, I would have hoped to have some contact. I've had no contact when I've submitted resumes to recruiters. They never get back to you. They never update you. So expect nothing from recruiters, and then if you get something, then you're lucky and they've got a coincidental role. As I say, no disrespect for recruiters, but they're in a difficult situation too. They used to give you updates, check in with you, actively, farm out your resume, try and get you jobs. For whatever reason, that just isn't working anymore. So don't expect that level of service, because I certainly haven't experienced it on the recruitment side. So I think you need to keep applying for jobs. The other thing I think that's important that my wife has always said to me is you can't sit behind your screen for 8 hours on LinkedIn hitting apply for jobs, because if it's like me, you're going to get virtually zero responses, or almost worse, you're going to get those auto declines of, thank you, we appreciate what you've put into here, but we're going with another client. Or more insultingly, someone more suited to the role. More insultingly when, in my case, for example, I find that wording really insulting, given I've got, more than 20 years experience of exactly what the roles I'm applying for are. In many cases, very frustrating, because it's almost insulting at that point. I think the other thing I would say is be prepared, if you are lucky enough to get an interview, for some pretty bizarre recruiting practice, even in big studios. I just was unsuccessful with a very big organisation that I won't say who it is. But what I will say is that organisation, I was applying for 3 months and talking to people. They then kept me on ice for about a month as part of that at the end. I had spoken to most of their C-suite. I liked the job. I liked all the people that I spoke to, only to be told afterwards that they felt that I was amazing. They had no constructive feedback, but that I was just too senior for the job.
After 3 months, they came to that. Yeah. They came to that determination. Yeah.
So I don't know why it takes you that long to do it. I still like the company, still like the people there. I feel like I could help them with their recruitment process, because that was not a good candidate experience. But that, even from a very respected company, that was my experience for a very senior role. So, like I say, if I were you, I would expect the unexpected in job roles. I won't personally do any AI video interviews before it. That's where I draw the line not because I'm a rabid anti-AI person, but because I don't want to be doing interviews to camera to be analysed prior to anything else. I'm confident on my performance in an interview, but I'm just not willing to do video interviews to nobody. So draw your line on what you are and aren't willing to do and aren't willing to go through, and be aware that there will be some challenges along the way. There's no easy fix and there's no easy answer. I think the most radical thing I would say about this is just be aware in this industry that I think what has been shown to us by the studios that exist so far, not all of them, but by many of them, is that if you're not in the room when the decisions are made, so if you're not senior enough to object or to give a counterpoint, then you are just a number when it comes to whether they decide that they need to lay people off to increase shareholder value or any of the other reasons that there are. So there's not truly any true stability in games, and I think we all have to just be prepared for the fact that unless we're going to build it with a new generation of game studios that are committed to providing a degree of stability for the people that work there, then it doesn't exist right now. I'm not willing to persist in that, and I want to be part of changing that, but that's certainly not what we're seeing across the industry, sadly.
Well, Rich, thank you for illuminating that to us. A lot of the people that are going to watch this, I've found that actually there's quite a few people in gaming that are actually listening to these. Some developers who've reached out to me find it interesting, but also I think more importantly, the people who play these games need to understand the people behind the games that they play and the reality of the situation of what they're seeing in the news, what that actually means. It's it's really easy these days. I think we're all very guilty of reading a headline and extrapolating the whole thing from reading a headline without really understanding the effects and then the people who are affected by it by derivatives, right? Like how that affects one group of people and then how that affects other people from that, right? Actually, I mentioned Jason Schreier earlier. He was even talking about how one thing that I had never considered was you were talking about co-development. Well, think of all these places that are closing down, studios shutting down, projects getting canceled. Well, there's that immediate group of people who are being let go, but there's also the people who are helping in co-development, right? So there's also like an extent. It's not just that. It's so much more than just the immediate numbers. So it's good for people to know what's happening and be in touch with the video games that we all love, right? So
yeah, I mean, it's very easy to see these numbers, and because they're so large, 1,400 people laid off, 10,000 people laid off, 300 people, 17, 15. Those are individuals, families, lives really being destroyed because most game developers, especially more junior ones, they don't have years of money saved up. In many cases, there are mortgages, there are children, there are spouses, partners. The human cost is vile, frankly, at the moment. We need to do something to change it. What that is not immediately apparent, apart from being a part of the change you want to see, which is, it's a cliche, but it's also incredibly relevant to where we are right now.
Right on. Well, hey, Rich, I won't hold you up any longer. Thank you so much for giving me a couple hours of your time, man. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation, and as I say, I hope this is useful to somebody.
Absolutely. Any place that you want people to follow you on or keep tabs on you on or just keep out for you? I know you're pretty active on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place, I would guess.
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I think that's the best place. If I give you any other things, you're just going to get car pictures. So you probably don't want those anyway.
Oh man, I got an R8 in the background. I like cars. I get down with cars, man.
I see the Audi poster behind you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say if people follow me on LinkedIn, I don't understand LinkedIn either right now. I have posts in the last month that have nearly 100,000 views, and I have posts that I think are even more relevant that have 200. So, I guess I fail at social media, but I post a lot.
That's the way it works, my friend. Let me tell you, that's exactly how it works. So,
I post on LinkedIn. I always, unless someone's trying to sell me something, I pretty much always accept invitation requests, and I'm happy to talk to people. As I say, if anyone actually wants help and they want to pay for it, I also do consulting and advisory, but that's a pretty sketchy market right now. Too many people doing it and not enough work. But maybe someone will find my pearls of wisdom on LinkedIn useful. That would be nice to think.
Right on.